Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is yet another topic video. And the topic for this video is the worst season of Saturday Night Live. Now, Saturday Night Live is honestly one of my favorite sketch comedy shows. It's a show that, even though there are some definite ups and downs throughout this show's history, I enjoy this show quite a bit. I grew up watching episodes of this show on NBC late at night, or on Comedy Central, or on VHS from VHS tapes that I would rent from the local library. I really have a definite passion for this show, even when it comes to some of the weaker and some of the worst seasons, because this is, in my opinion, a landmark. It's a landmark of television, and there's a reason why this show is still surviving and in a lot of ways thriving to this day for 50 seasons and counting. But not all seasons are winners. And for this video, I'm going to be discussing what is considered to be the worst seasons of the show from fans and critics, and then determining at the end which one I feel is the worst of them all. Now, before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on this topic, I would like to give a special shout out to Vontae for requesting the topic for this video. And if there is another topic, TV show, or film that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to either my PayPal, my Patreon, or my Cash App. The links to all three are in the video description down below, and I will try to get to your requests as soon as I possibly can. Now, I'm going to be discussing season 6 and season 20, one right after the other. And then after I discuss both of them, then I will offer a conclusion and then my final verdict in terms of which one I think is the worst. Now, before I start breaking down season 6, I do want to point out that I did do some extra research. I watched some episodes of season 11, as well as seasons 30 and 31, which are also considered to be pretty weak or pretty poor by a lot of people's standards. And I didn't finish those seasons because I was starting to get a little burned out on bad SNL, having spent the past couple months doing a deep dive on season 6 and season 20. But from what I saw, yeah, some of the episodes were not that great, but it's one of those things where I think my opinion of those seasons is to be determined. Maybe I'll cover those seasons in the future. Uh, I would probably say not in the near future, but there's a definite chance that I would cover at least season 11 sometime, because that's another season I've been really curious about discussing and talking about, because of the fact that it was the first season that featured Lorne Michaels back as the producer and showrunner, and because of the cast. I mean, it included such names like Robert Downey Jr. and Anthony Michael Hall. So that is a season that I would like to do a discussion of sometime. But seasons 30 and 31, I don't know yet. And the same thing goes for some of the more recent seasons, which I also heard were not that great either. Maybe I could do a video talking about current SNL and my thoughts on it. But for right now, I'm just sticking to seasons 6 and 20 for this video. Season 6, in my opinion, is one of the most infamous seasons of SNL, and for a lot of reasons. And it's a season that I've been wanting to discuss on this channel in some form for years now, ever since I first started watching episodes of it and doing research, reading books and reading articles and really doing a lot of deep research on it. Like it was definitely something that I was curious about, and I'm really passionate about SNL in general. And this is a season, in my opinion, that despite how bad it is interesting. It's an interesting season to watch and an interesting season to discuss. This is the first season of the show where you had an entirely new cast, for the most part, an entirely new writing staff, except for Brian Doyle Murray, who was the only writer that was retained uh, for this season, and a completely different showrunner and producer in Gene Domanian. And because of all this change and this churning, what you get is a very messy, very wild and uneven season. And I really do feel that a major part of why this season is so bad is because of the producer and the showrunner and her inexperience. Jean Domanian was not ready for this at all. I honestly wonder whether or not it was just an act of desperation on NBC's part and they just gave her the job because she was willing to do it. Because this was a very rough patch for NBC. They were struggling in the ratings and they were failing to find a hit show for the network. SNL, though, was one of those shows that was still a cash cow and was still getting ratings. So they did not want to put this show on hiatus for a year. And I understand, I get it, but that desperation, and in my opinion, almost killed this show before it even had a chance to get to a 20th season or beyond. And it starts with NBC just not willing to work with Lorne Michaels, which is something that is just baffling to think about nowadays, considering how Lorne Michaels and NBC are considered to be so tied into one another that you could even make the argument that Lorne is NBC right now, that Lorne made NBC. But NBC actually forced him off their network and off SNL prior to season 6. Lorne wanted to take a break after working his butt off for 5 years in a row, building SNL into a cultural landmark and one of the most groundbreaking and successful shows on television. And he understandably was like, hey, I've been working so hard for so long. I want to take a little bit of a break, but I'm not done with the show. I want to come back and be there for the 6th season and keep this show going for many, many years to come. But NBC, because of their desperation for ratings and to boost their uh, failing network at the time, they did not want to work with Lauren. They didn't want to really accommodate him. But Lorne, because of how passionate he still was about the show, he wasn't ready to budge. He wasn't ready to quit. He kept still trying to get NBC to change their mind. And NBC eventually stabbed him in the back and hired Gene Domanian without his knowledge to be the new replacement for Lorne. And that just caused a ripple effect that really damaged the show, because once the writers found out that Lauren was backstabbed by the network, they quit. They all left along with Lauren, because Lauren, once he found that out, he was like, "All right, I'm done too. Like I don't want anything to do with this new season or with this network right now. If you're gonna do that to me, like that is just beyond messed up." And it's kind of crazy that NBC found a way to get him back after how they treated him, if you really think about it. NBC is really lucky that Lorne was so forgiving and was willing to come back to the network after what NBC did to Lorne. And I think the show struggled to get other potentially more talented cast members to sign on for this season because of word of mouth and what happened with Lauren. He had a lot of influence in the sketch comedy world in the U.S. at this time, understandably so. And so a lot of people who were considering being on SNL when they knew that Lauren was still technically attached to a sixth season, they probably were like, "Nah, we don't want anything to do with it. We don't want anything to do with NBC after what happened with Lauren." And so that made this season's job so much more difficult in terms of coming up with a new cast. And I think it also affected the quality of writers that they were able to get, because the best writers in the sketch comedy business at that time were working for SNL, and they for the most part left except for Brian Doyle Murray. So now what, you're going to have a lot of people who are not working for the show anymore talking about what happened, and probably in some ways also doing their part to try to sabotage the sixth season in a way that, honestly, I think, considering the way that things went down, it's not necessarily undeserving. Like, it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, it's kind of messed up what they're doing, considering the fact that there's always new people who are just trying to get a job. But on the other hand, you can understand why a lot of bad mouthing was going on with these writers, with other potential writers, and with other people in the industry in terms of potential new, not ready for prime time players. But I don't think Jean was really that great at spotting talent either, which is crazy because she was considered to be, I think, one of the casting directors for the show prior to getting the promotion as the producer and the showrunner, because she passed on Jim Carrey, Mercedes Rule, John Goodman, Paul Rubens, Sandra Bernhard, and even passed on Andy Kaufman doing a regular weekly appearance on the show. She passed on every opportunity to have maybe a little bit of an olive branch there, with Andy Kaufman, who was, a part of memorable bits in the previous 5 seasons. No, Andy, I pass. I don't want you on this new SNL. And I get it. Some of those performers were not big names yet, like Paul Rubens and Jim Carrey, but I cannot believe for a second that Charles Rocket is more talented than Jim Carrey, whether or not he was a more well-known name at the time. Also, I think another problem with Gene Domanian and all of this casting and stuff is that because of the fact that Lorne was essentially forced out of his position on SNL, I think that led to a lot of cast members who might have considered coming back for a sixth season to like pass the torch to the new cast, just simply refusing to associate themselves with the show. So that is really, really bad. That is a really bad hand that Gene was dealt. But Gene didn't have the experience to handle it to begin with. And that's another serious problem. She never produced a show like this, never had any experience being the showrunner of a sketch comedy show. And it really was quite obvious when it comes to the kinds of sketches that she was fighting for. She was fighting the network over. You got to air this sketch where a bunch of yuppies go and buy drugs in Harlem. It's not that funny of a sketch. You were willing to die on a sword for a sketch that's incredibly forgettable. And the only thing that's memorable about it is that it's a little edgy for the time. But other than that, she just didn't seem to have an eye or an idea of what to look for when it comes to iconic or legendary or funny sketches. And if it wasn't for Eddie Murphy, who just fell into her lap, this show easily could have been canceled. The ratings were bad enough, the critical reception was bad enough, the end product was bad enough, but thanks to a 19-year-old phenom and Eddie Murphy, she kept her job for longer than she should have, and the show was able to continue airing until the writer's strike, when it eventually was given its merciful end for this particular rendition of the show. Now, Jean, I don't want to be too hard on her considering she was given a nearly impossible task to pull off for a first timer. But at the same time, I agree with Al Franken when he's saying things like she did the worst possible job anybody could do who could speak the English language. It's a pretty harsh thing to say, but it's very realistic. She was a terrible showrunner and producer for SNL and during this entire season. Just absolutely terrible. And the cast is not much better. It really is not. This is easily one of the weakest casts in the entire history of SNL, if you ask me. You have some people who would go on to have some success, and in the case of Eddie Murphy, go on to become uh, mega successful in comedy. But there's a lot of people here who I just don't really feel like they were ready for prime time. There's a lot of people here who I think were the result of the network just settling for talent, because all these other names were like, no, 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 you forced Lauren off the show. I will not appear on this bastardized version of SNL. And I'm honestly ashamed and sickened that you would even ask me to appear on this uh, messed up uh, offshoot of the show. And that being said, there is some talent here, but this cast never gels. And yes, it is true that a lot of first seasons for casts do start off a little rough. It happened with the Not Ready for Primetime Players in season one. But once they hit their stride, they hit their stride. And they really found a groove. That never happened with this cast. And they're all Gene Domanian hires. So this is the cast that Gene Domanian hired to replace the Not Ready for Primetime Players from seasons 1 through 5. Danny Dillon, who appeared in, I think, the third episode of season 1 and did a little bit. Gilbert Gottfried. Yes, that Gilbert Gottfried. a very young Gilbert Gottfried who was very wet behind the ears in this particular season. Gail Mathias, Eddie Murphy, who was almost passed on in favor of Charlie Barnett or Robert Townsend. And he was horribly underutilized for a good chunk of the season. I mean, his first appearance on the show was as an extra who had no lines in a sketch called In Search of the um, Black Republican. Then you also have Joe Piscopo, Ann Risley, and Charles Rocket. And you had some featured players like Yvonne Hudson, Matthew Lawrence, and Patrick Weathers. Out of this cast, the best cast members to me were Eddie Murphy, of course. Like Eddie, from the first time that he actually is given some lines, which is in a Weekend Updates segment when he eats some dog food, the show comes alive. It was dead in the water, barely getting any laughs, barely getting any smirks or chuckles from me. And then Eddie shows up, and then it is like I'm watching a completely different show. And it continued like that throughout this season because he was easily the biggest and the brightest spot when it comes to this season, if you ask me. It's Eddie's sketches, Eddie's sketch comedy, his stand-up comedy. They were all the best out of this entire season, if you ask me. I mean, this is the first appearance of the iconic sketch Mr. Robinson's Neighborhood. And the first sketch of that series is laugh out loud funny to this day. And there's just so many bits with Eddie that are just instant classics in this season. Joe Piscopo is not too bad either. Definitely shows some talent when it comes to being able to have a good amount of energy and being willing to play the fool and play his voice in different ways. And uh, he definitely did showcase some pretty solid impressions, like his impression of Sinatra. And I also feel that Gail Mathias was another performer from this season that showed some promise as well. She did a good job playing this character called Vicky, who's a Valley girl. She did some good impressions of different various political figures and played different sort of characters. And she wasn't very good on Weekend Update, but nobody was good on Weekend Update in this season because this was the worst Weekend Update ever, in my opinion. Out of all of the Weekend Updates that I've seen, season 6 has the worst Weekend Update of all time. None of the Weekend Update segments are good. If they are tolerable, it's because of Eddie Murphy or some other cast member doing a bit. It's not because of the anchors and their jokes and anything involving with the rest of the Weekend Update segment. I mean, Charles Rocket is hands down the worst Weekend Update anchor that has ever been on the show. Like the guy was mugging for the camera, stomping his foot, trying desperately to get people to laugh at incredibly cringy and unfunny jokes, and it was torture. It was genuinely torture to watch Charles Rocket and Gail Mathias stumble through the Weekend Update segment in this season. But other than that, I think Gail did a good job, and I think she was good enough to actually be retained for the 7th season. The rest of the cast, though, in my opinion, were easy fires. Danny Dillon, she's a sweet gal. I think she's okay in small doses, but she's not the best at improv. This is very evident in one of the worst sketches of the season in the Weather Report. And she just played pretty much the same characters in almost everything. A precocious little girl, or some kind of lady who speaks in a kooky British accent, or maybe a Southern accent, playing yokels. Like, just a really limited performer, if you ask me. And Gilbert Gottfried, he started out fine, but then as the season went on, he just got really depressed, I think, when it comes to the status of the show. And he just started to die inside. And as a result, like, he didn't get that much screen time, didn't get that many sketches. And in all honesty, the sketches that he did get, he never did one that was great. The best thing that Gilbert Gottfried did when it comes to this season is do a sketch that was maybe adequate, but that was about it. Anne Risley was easily the weakest and the worst cast member of this season. I don't remember a single thing that she did in this entire season that was noteworthy, let alone that funny. I don't. I really don't understand how or why she got cast on SNL, because she doesn't show good timing when it comes to the comedy. She doesn't show that she's able to be good with improv. She does not show that she has enough charm and charisma to be on television as a part of a cast of a sketch comedy show like this. I don't get it. I don't understand. And she didn't really go on to do much of anything after this for a very legitimate reason, if you ask me. And then you have Charles Rocket, who's just doing a painful Bill Murray impression for the majority of his time on the show, to the point where even Bill pointed it out in an episode that Bill hosted, to the cheers of the audience. Because he's like, "Hey man, I hear you're doing an impression of me. Knock it off." And then everybody in the audience is like clapping their hands and hooting and hollering. And I'm like, "Yeah, because he is." And it's not a particularly good impression of Bill Murray either. And I think a lot of people have said they don't mind his Rocket Report segments. I never cared for those. And he is more well known for dropping the F bomb on national television than anything else that he did on this show for a reason. So, yeah, this is a bad, really weak set of cast members for SNL. There's a reason why this is considered to be one of the worst casts, and for a legitimate reason. That being said, I do have sympathy for this cast. I mean, right from the very beginning, the first time this cast shows up in this season is in a cold open with Elliot Gould, where they compare themselves to the previous cast. So from day one, they were already in the shadow of the previous cast in people's minds. That is just rough. And in a lot of ways, very unfair to them. But at the same time, it's just not a good cast. They didn't gel, they didn't mesh together, and the only two cast members that were retained after Dumanian was fired and replaced by Dick Ebersol was Eddie Murphy and Joe Piscopo. And you could make an argument for Gail Mathias, but other than her, no one else was worth retaining. And then you just have the quality of the episodes themselves. The best episode of this season, in my opinion, is the Bill Murray hosted episode. And it's the last season that Gene Domanian was involved as a producer. And it's still not great. It's a above average episode, but it's not a great episode. There isn't a single great episode of this season to me. There are great musical guests, like Kid Creole and the Coconuts, James Brown, Cheap Trick, Jimmy Cliff, Deborah Harry, Todd Rundgren, Prince, Delbert McClinton. But there really aren't that many. Well, there aren't any great episodes, if you ask me. Elliot Gould, that's an okay premiere, but it's definitely got some problems. You have uh episode 2, which is the train wreck of an episode hosted by Malcolm McDowell, which in all honesty I think is arguably maybe the worst episode of the show. Maybe not though, because I think there's an episode in season 20 that could be a contender, but this is still very, very low on the list when it comes to the quality of SNL episodes. Uh, it's also the first time you saw Eddie Murphy appear in the background of one sketch. But man, this is the one that has the commie hunting sketch, which is one of the most awkward sketches in the history of the show, where I think it's Joe Piscopo or maybe it's Charles Rocket. One of them drops the N word, and it's just as awkward as it sounds. There's a really bad Jack the Stripper sketch. There's just so many bad sketches in this. This is just a terrible episode, and I didn't like Captain Beefheart either. Uh, and I wasn't the only one, because there is with Captain Beefheart, there's a guy in the audience who literally screams shit. I'm like, yeah, that perfectly describes this entire episode and Captain Beefheart and his magic band. The Ellen Burstyn episode was pretty decent. I didn't mind the Jamie Lee Curtis episode. I like it more than others do. David Carradine's episode was a mess because he was drunk for the majority of the episode. Ray Sharkey seemed like he was high on cocaine throughout his episode, but it led to some good energy on his part. But man, did he look coked up. Karen Black is a better episode than what she did in season 2, but I don't think it's as great as people make it out to be. I really don't. A lot of people say this is like an iconic episode, like one of the best episodes of the show in general. And I'm like, I don't actually agree with that. But that's just me. Robert Hayes, his episode wasn't that great either. There was like one good sketch with him in a blow up doll. Sally Kellerman, she was barely even in the episode when it comes to any sketches, and that was just a weak episode. So was Deborah Harry. Charlene Tilton's episode was the one where Charles Rocket is in a Dallas parody. He gets shot on stage, and then before the good nights, he says, "I'd like to know who the fuck did it," in response to Tilton's query on how Rocket felt after being shot. And that is one of the most infamous moments in the entire show. This is an episode that I would say is one of the better episodes just for its infamy and also for the Mr. Robinson's Neighborhood sketch, but there's still some bad sketches in it. And then the Bill Murray sketch, I did like that. That was like the first episode that I legitimately would probably say I liked and I would watch again. There's a good Alter States parody in that, and there's a handful of good sketches in that one. And a good cold open as well, and the best monologue out of anybody who hosted for this season. And then episode 13 is a weird one because it doesn't have a host. You start out with this nostalgic opening with Chevy Chase, and Chevy Chase appears sporadically throughout the episode. And this is an episode that was intended to be a transition episode because Domanium was fired at this point, and Dick Ebersol was now in as producer, and there were new cast members like Tony Brisato and Robin Duke and Tim Kazurinsky, and they had to be squeezed in. And this is also an episode where certain cast members were already fired and were not appearing in this episode. This is also an episode that features Al Franken, who does a pretty fun piece where he talks about how they should pull the plug on SNL. And you also have like Laurie Metcalf from Roseanne. She has her only appearance on SNL as a cast member in a taped segment, which was interesting to see. But the only other thing that I would probably say was really memorable about this last episode was a really cool moment where you see Chevy Chase, Christopher Reeve, and Robin Williams all together on the same stage, which was incredibly surreal and really cool and awesome. But the two of them don't do any sketches. And this is the last episode. Now, that wasn't initially the plan, though. The plan was to actually have more episodes of this season because they already had hosts lined out who were gonna appear for later episodes in the season. The hosts were gonna be Robert Guglielmi, Dan Aykroyd, Steve Martin, Brooke Shields, and Buck Henry. But the writer's strike happened, and then NBC just decided to not continue on with this season at all and just let the strike play out and then just start over from scratch with season 7, which you could argue could be the most important season of the show, considering how uh, badly the show was being received by people at this time and how much it was on thin ice. And that might be an interesting video to do sometime as well, to discuss the uh, 7th season. But yeah, season 6 was bottom of the barrel, in my opinion, for this show. A lot of people say it's not that bad. I respectfully disagree. It is that bad. It really is. Like I said, there's one legitimately good episode to me that I would watch again, and it's the Bill Murray one. Other than that, there isn't a single other episode on this season that I would ever willingly watch again. Now, season 20, this is a season that is very much in the middle of a rebuild year for SNL. Because prior to this season, a lot of well-known, well-received, well-liked cast members left, like Phil Hartman and Dana Carvey and so on and so forth. This is when the show was fully trying to hand the reins off to the bad boys, David Spade, Adam Sandler, Chris Farley, and a lot of people look at this season as proof that they were not really ready for that and they couldn't handle that. And after watching it, yeah, I can honestly agree. A lot of their comedy is very stand-up comedy focused and has a lot of stuff in it that can be considered to be really obnoxious, and is better in smaller doses. This is also the season that Lorne Michaels points to as the first time that he really felt like the show could get canceled, but I disagree. I think the first time that was really ever a genuine threat was with season 6. But this was the second time that the show was at such a bad spot that it could potentially get canceled. And this is a season that had a lot of turnover with cast members. Not only the cast members that left, like Phil Hartman and Rob Schneider and Julia Sweeney, but even with the new people that they brought in, with Janine Garofalo, who left at a certain point in the season, with returning cast members like Mike Myers, who left at a certain point in this season. So you had like so many people just coming in and out of this season. Like you had Chris Elliott, Janine Garofalo, Laura Keitlinger, Jay Moore, uh, Morwena Banks, Mark McKinney, Molly Shannon, just like so many people. And this is also the season, which was the last season for Kevin Nealon. It was his 9th. And Dana Carvey was actually asked by Lorne, I think, at one point to come back, but eventually something was decided that Dana was not going to return. I'm wondering if that has to do with the feud between him and Mike Myers that started during the filming of Wayne's World 2. Instead, Dana just came back to host one of the episodes for this season. Now, there are people who actually point out this season being worse than season 6. I don't understand how or why. There are some really bad episodes in this season. There are some really bad sketches, but you have Lorne Michaels as the producer and showrunner, which is a million times better than Gene Domanian. You have a better writing staff with Jim Downey, Al Franken, Tim Harley, Brian Kelly, Norm Hiscock, and the cast is just so much better. I mean, Chris Elliott, Chris Farley, Ellen Cleghorn, Janine Garofalo, Norm Macdonald, Michael McKean, or McKeon, Mark McKinney, Tim Meadows, Mike Myers, Kevin Nealon, Adam Sandler, David Spade. Molly Shannon makes her first ever appearance on the show in this season. So the cast, even though it's honestly a bit of a mess because there's just too many cast members, it's still better than anybody in season 6. And the overall quality of this season is better. There are so many more episodes in this season that I would watch willingly again. And this is also a season that features some absolute gems and iconic sketches that are still laugh out loud funny to this day. Other than Mr. Robinson's Neighborhood, when it comes to the first Mr. Robinson's Neighborhood sketch, there isn't a single sketch, in my opinion, in season 6 that is on the same level of quality as the best sketches in season 20. I mean, this is the season that has the Pepper Boys sketch. It's the one that has that hilarious sketch with Chris Elliott and Jeff Daniels when Jeff Daniels is on a show hosted by Chris Elliott and the host keeps showing clips of Dumb and Dumber and the bathroom scene over and over again while Jeff Daniels is just getting increasingly more and more frustrated. It's also the season that has uh the polar bear sketch, where all these different cast members get eviscerated by this polar bear. Has this hilarious Sea Park sketch where Chris Farley just keeps getting doused in water by this whale. And there's just so many sketches in this season that are classics. The Japanese game show sketch is from this season. There's even a great sketch that's a parody of Reservoir Dogs and Quentin Tarantino films, but it's also a parody of Welcome Back, Kotter at the same time with John Travolta, with a cameo by Steve Buscemi. And like it just goes on and on. You got the Steve Martin penis beauty cream sketch, which kills me. You have Norm Macdonald and every single weekend update segment that he does in this, his OJ Simpson jokes, his deadpan, just so hilarious, cracked me up. You got so much, so many, just really funny, really enjoyable, really memorable sketches. The final Stuart Smalley sketch when he goes after people who didn't see his movie. You have 2 short films by Bruce McCulloch from Kids in the Hall. You have a super fan sketch with the Swerskis, duh Bears, duh Bulls. There's just so many moments in this. Yes, there are some awful episodes, but there's more good to great episodes in this season than there are straight up train wrecks. But there are some train wrecks. I mean, George Foreman, that is one of the worst episodes I've seen of the show. But somehow it's even able to be topped in terms of its terribleness by the Deion Sanders episode. That's kind of a running theme though, because other than Michael Jordan and some other exceptions like Eli Manning or Peyton Manning, uh, sports athletes make for terrible hosts on SNL. But it's not just athletes that were bad hosts. Paul Reiser, that is a really awful, hard to watch episode. I mean, it has a parody of Aliens that's like a combination of Aliens and Mad About You. And it was one of the laziest sketches I think I've ever seen. I was like, oh, look, it's funny because it's Mad About You, but it's with a xenomorph. Mad About You, aliens. That's what Aliens 4 is. Mad About You, aliens. There's a really awkward sketch called Sparkle Bright, which has a really messed up undertone to it that's trying to make it seem like a bunch of ad executives are feeling uncomfortable that there's a long kiss that's happening on a commercial for toothpaste, but it seems like the only reason why they're uncomfortable with it is because it's an interracial kiss. Like that is a really uh uh sketchy sketch to say the least. And there's a lot of those throughout this season. I mean, there's one with is the Paul Reiser one? Is that the one with the awful alien? Like the alien? No, I think that's a different one. The Paul Reiser one. That's also Paul Reiser is the one where Jay Moore stole a comedy bit from a stand-up comic and got sued for it. And that sketch about a bunch of Irish guys at a bar telling people to leave the bar if they don't want to drink the correct way, that was removed from all broadcast because of the fact that he stole it from this one guy. So that's definitely messed up. But yeah, there's one. Oh, it was the Deion Sanders. That's why the Deion Sanders one was the one with this really bad sketch about a UFO that landed and a bunch of guys go in and just get probed. It's just a bunch of uh gay sex jokes. And I do agree with some critics when it comes to some of the juvenile humor in this season, anal warts, gay sex, and so on and so forth. But yeah, there are some really bad episodes in this that are hard to watch. But there's a lot of classics and there's a lot of good ones. I mean, John Travolta is a really good one. That's the one that has that hilarious sketch where John Travolta plays a vampire and people are assuming that he's gay, and it's John Travolta fighting the gay rumors that were surrounding him at the time. You have Dana Carvey, who just breaks out of greatest hits and it's just as funny as always. John Turturro has a really underrated episode in my opinion when he hosts. Alec Baldwin has a good one. Jeff Daniels has a good one. David Hyde Pierce from Frasier has a good one. Bob Newhart has another good episode. George Clooney has a good one. John Goodman has a good one. Damon Wayans, in my opinion, has a good one too because he reprises two uh, uh, In Living Color characters, and Anton, from Men on Film, and he also reprises the homeless guy, um, which is cool. Anton Jackson. He's the one that's Antoine is the guy from Men on Film, but Anton is the guy. Antoine is Antoine Merriweather is David Allen Greer's character, who does make a cameo and shows up again, and Blaine Edwards is the character that Damon played in that sketch. Just to correct myself, but yeah, I had fun with that. The Courtney Cox one was not too bad. Bob Saget one was hit and miss. David Duchovny one was fun just for, some of the X-Files jokes and so on and so forth. But yeah, there's some bad sketches. There's some bad episodes. But most of the time, season 20 is not at all a hard watch if you ask me. And I think a lot of its reputation stems from a hit piece article that came out in the New Yorker during this season's run, which was very one sided. I read the article and it was so one sided, it honestly hurt to read because it was talking about how SNL is a boys' club and it's a disaster behind scenes, and Janine Garofalo, who's talented, is being underutilized and being pushed under the bus, and so on and so forth. And the article never talked about any positives. It just assumed that the show was sucking now and just ran with that, and then talked about the show in the worst possible light imaginable. It was such a hit piece article. It was such an obvious instance of an offer targeting the show. And yeah, it had its fair share of bad moments and bad sketches. And it is a shame when it comes to how the people behind the scenes handled female performers at this time. But honestly, Janine Garofalo, I think she was just a bad fit for this show. She was good on the Ben Stiller show, but that's not a live show. This is a live show. There's a difference, and she just cannot maintain energy. There's so many sketches at multiple points in this season when she is just visibly showing signs of just not giving a fuck, and it affects the performance and it affects the entire show. And I think she never really showed that she was a star in the making on SNL. So why would she get more screen time? Why would she get more roles? There actually was an episode where she was given as much screen time as possible and she barely did anything with it. So I think Janine, I understand her issues, but I think she also didn't do that well on the show. Ellen Cleghorn did a good job, in my opinion, much better job, and I felt that she was given more uh roles on the show. Maybe not as many as she should have, but I still felt like she was getting more screen time. But that's just me, and I know there's a lot of stuff going on with Jay Moore and uh the bad boys just being problematic, Chris Farley and Adam Sandler and David Spade. And yeah, I saw that a little bit with David Spade just half-assing his way through sketches, Adam Sandler just kind of doing the same shtick again and again, Chris Farley just yelling loudly and just expecting laughs to come just solely due to the fact that he's yelling. And it did feel like actors like Chris Elliott were not utilized as well, or Mark McKinney. But I do feel that this is a season that's honestly a little misunderstood. I'll come to the defense of season 20. I will not defend season 6, even as much as I want to, because of the circumstances surrounding that season. But season 20, I'll defend that season. I don't think it's a great season, but I think it's actually a pretty decent season, despite some really low points. But now we get to the conclusion here. And based on what you've heard me say, I could probably I probably deduce that I think a lot of you are thinking that I'm leaning one particular way. And if you guessed season 6, you're correct. Season 6 to me is hands down the worst season of the show that I've seen to date. Like I said, there's like one episode that I liked. Everything else was either average, forgettable, or terrible. And it's got one of the worst casts, even though it's got Eddie Murphy and Joe Piscopo and talented but kind of underutilized performers like Yale Mathias. There's like one sketch that I felt was memorable and iconic, and it's the Mr. Robinson sketch. Other than that, the most memorable thing about season 6 is Charles Rocket dropping the F bomb on national TV. Season 20 has some really bad episodes, the Deion Sanders one in particular. That is a try not to cringe challenge, the entire episode. Good luck. Good luck with that one if you decide to ever subject yourself to that. But despite all the turmoil behind the scenes, despite the bad boys being a little too unruly and a dip in network ratings, I don't think it's that bad of a season. It's not one of my favorite seasons. It is not one of the best seasons, but I don't think it's really a bad season. I think it's a season that just has this reputation because of all the cast members that left afterwards, and because of things like Jay Moore getting sued for stealing and plagiarizing a sketch, and the whole stuff with Janine Garofalo and the New Yorker article. And I think a lot of that is why season 20 has its reputation, and because of the worst sketches, which are really, really bad. But there's a lot of good sketches and some classic sketches in this season. You cannot say that about season 6. And while season 6 maybe does have a better slate of musical guests at points, I can't even give it that because the musical guests in season 20 are still great. I mean, there's an entire episode where you get not 2, but 3 REM songs. You've got Blink 182. I believe, I think it's Blink 182. You've got Eric Clapton. You've got Green Day. No, it's not Blink 182. You've got Green Day. Sorry, I don't know why I got those two mixed up. But yeah, you got Green Day. You got Annie Lennox. You got the Cranberries. You got Hole. You got the Beastie Boys. Tom Petty. So that's still a good slate of musical guests. And when it comes to Weekend Update, it's no contest. Season 20 beats the ever loving crap out of season 6 when it comes to Weekend Update because of Norm Macdonald. So I don't think it's even close. And I watched both seasons. But that's just me personally. Yeah, that's my thoughts on season 6 and season 20. Uh, Two of the worst seasons of Saturday Night Live. And I would say if you're a fan of sketch comedy, check out season 20 sometime. And only watch season 6 if you're morbidly curious. Like if you're curious to watch a show die before your very eyes, then go ahead and watch season 6. Otherwise, I wouldn't recommend it. But that is my thoughts on the worst seasons of SNL. And as always, I'll see you later. See ya.